Welcome back. Day one of Radio Days 2024. Looking forward to 2025. This is our last programme of the evening live, and it's the podcast recording of Harry's Spectrum Voices Facebook-based page. The 555. Hi Harry, are you ready to take the reins on Radio Days?
Yes, absolutely, Julian. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is 555, Harry's Facebook. A sort of relaunch at this moment of what was formerly called Live Unmasked, which basically what we do is we discuss the Facebook posts which I've shared over the last coming couple of days and the topics that come from them. So nothing's changed apart from the name, which is 555. So the first post I'll share tonight is from Swan Autism Scotland, who are an autistic-led charity run by and for autistic women and non-binary people since 2012. And what the post is a reflection on the past year. So it says, as we come towards the end of 2024, we would like to share some amazing numbers with you. 169 visits to the Swan in-person social meetup groups, 402 visits to the Swan online social groups, 88 walkers at our Swan walk groups, and 345 emails answered by our digital volunteers. Thank you to all the amazing volunteers for all your hard work in 2024. What's people's thoughts? I'll start with mine. It's good to share these sort of reflective posts, especially when it's a milestone sort of thing, particularly if it's a service or even just an individual, and sharing like progress milestones, like numbers and numbers of the impact, the positive impact of things. And I've known Swan for many years. I know the lot of work that they've done over the years. We share a lot from Swan Autism Scotland. They do so much. And they're so progressive and so inclusive as they can be. It's great to see the progress and the good news stories that they share. And they're all over, they're nationwide as well. That's the thing as well about the thing. A lot of Scotland sometimes gets missed out because it's geographical spread. But as some of us are aware that the online thing helps bridge that gap. And Swan is certainly one of the organisations that certainly look to bridge that gap as well. So I just thought I'd add that in as well.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the history that they have put in. When I first knew about my autism, I looked around for different organisations and different groups and how they structured themselves and what they achieved. And I have to some extent been able to follow some of those groups and seen them either get smaller or disappear or go in directions that I'm not comfortable with. But of all of the ones that are local to us here, Swan are the most impressive of this kind of organisation. They're doing co-productions they're producing services. They have expanded and moved themselves on in a really impressive way. And like you say, they've gone for the whole of Scotland. They're missing out half of the population because they are the Scottish women's group, and they include non-binary people amongst that as well. So that's lovely and inclusive. So they have to some extent made sure that they are dealing with the issues that go with a group of people, and that's incredibly important. So the fact that they go across the whole of Scotland makes and expands it in that way when it's narrowing it in another way, I think is very important.
I was just thinking about the numbers and thinking about how that actually translates into the change that they're making in individual lives. And I've been mostly connected with Scottish Autism. I have been to a Swan seminar and it was amazing, and getting to hear an autistic woman speak and be used. I saw her as like quite a role model. She had a really, really cool career and had found her own ways to make it work. It opens up so much more opportunity, being able to identify with people like that. So yeah, I was just thinking about the difference that it will make to people to get to go to the groups and work together.
I think that's the important terminology or words is role model, because a lot of autistic people, including women and non-binary, are looking for a role model, not someone to copy, not someone to, but just someone to, to take inspiration from. I mean, in many ways, I suppose I've done that in the past with so many different people that I've met and I've listened to. Someone who's autistic that like goes onto a podium or a stage or even just stands up in a room and starts speaking with confidence, but not speaking in tongues, not speaking in a way that you feel detached, but feeling, they speak in a way that you're inspired because they're speaking very inclusively or as inclusively as they can. And they usually, from my experience, speak about their own life story, warts and all. It's like totally honest, and they talk about really tough times that would be very difficult for anyone to do. And that sort of thing that Swan do is part of that, as far as I'm aware, because that's what a lot of people want, is someone to. A lot of people feel detached and sometimes not human because the way they're being made to feel by their communities, intentionally or not. So there's someone to be inspired by, and they have this progressive, positive, certainly from the outside, life and career. That's certainly something that does help a lot of people and inspire a lot of people.
I think the possibly the elephant in the room here is that this is a women's organisation, and what I have seen from them has been incredibly impressive, and what I have seen from mainly male organisations is not very impressive. Is it too sexist for me to say that I think the women are doing this as a model of APOs or autistic organisations? They're doing it better, and the guys who have been swimming around in their politics should open their bloody eyes and look at what Swan are doing. Sorry, it's Christmas. I can be a bit sweary, can I?
Yes, you can be, of course. I know what you're saying, Jules. There's a lot of organisations that are male-dominated or male-led that will have that sort of, even though they're trying to be inclusive, or they say they're inclusive, they're not. And I think because of the way that women have been treated in terms of the autism diagnosis identity, it's like they went a different pathway. They went a progressive way because they've been kind of put out because of the kind of now outdated sort of ideology that autism was a male thing. So they've got the mindset of, which is good to say, it's not revenge, we'll just close you out as well. Obviously they can't live without male because that's not what it's about. But what it is it's like a more progressive mindset than the walls they keep going up against.
Is what you're saying, that it's more of a bonded experience because the similarity of their experience in comparison to what autism has been described before, that they've sort of got it together themselves and they've jumped ahead in the progression of autism. They're kind of cutting edge rather than the guys who have been hanging around are kind of stuck in effectively committee-based organisations.
Well, it certainly looks that way. It's like the kind of underdog thing. It's like the underdogs try twice as hard because they feel they've not had the chance. And because of the way that the autism thing began with women, as far as I can see, I mean, I can only say from my own position, the male privilege position, is that there's a bigger bond there, and that's what helps the drive forward. Because they know there's so many people or so many women out there that's being left out in the cold, and they're bringing people in slowly but surely. But the male one, or some of the male ones, we should add, is kind of a bit more strict and a bit more rigid, and basically like a clubhouse that you have to be a member of, and there's certain qualifications that you need to be part of that. Like for instance, the diagnosis thing. There'll be many groups out there that don't appreciate or they don't accept the self-diagnosis thing or identifying thing. It's a bit behind the times in some more progressive eyes. So some people miss out, and certainly women did.
I'm having a text conversation with Raymond here, and he's saying, straight men, gay men, are gay men still privileged? And I said I wasn't quite sure what the question was, and he says, well, a gay man is more in a minority position, so that would be a kind of level of privilege taken off them. And my thought on this is really that privilege comes very much like a graphic equalizer. You can push it up on one area, and you could say certain sexualities are more privileged than others in society. Yeah, straight ones. So if you're gay or if you're in another sexuality, there might be different levels of privilege you have to underprivilege. But then next to it, if you're a gay man, just a man on the man scale gives you a level of privilege of just being male, and then as you go down through the different genders, different levels to very underprivileged levels in some places. So, and then there's privilege for money, for genes for all kinds of versions of privilege where you can have a sliding scale of everything. So no, just because you're a gay man does not make you an underprivileged person. No, just because you're anything. In certain situations you will have more or less privilege. If you're a male at a table speaking out, you will have more room to speak, whether you're gay or straight. You know, it's not that kind of simple sum. It matters where your privilege is.
The next post is from the Neurodivergent Experience, which is a weekly podcast dedicated to exploring the vast world of autism, ADHD, and more. And it's hosted by the artistic photographer Jordan James and Simon Scott. And what they say is, being neurodivergent is often shrouded in misconceptions, stereotypes, and limited knowledge. While our experiences may overlap, no two stories are the same. Hosted by the artistic photographer Jordan James and Simon Scott, the Neurodivergent Experience is the weekly podcast dedicated to exploring the vast world of autism, ADHD, and more. Through this podcast, we aim to challenge those misconceptions and dive deep into the diverse experiences of those on the spectrum by sharing our personal stories and exploring topics like early interventions, sensory processing, education, employment, and much more. Each episode will feature insightful conversations about living in the spectrum, with guest experts, advocates, and allies who are passionate about creating an inclusive and accepting world. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself, a friend, family member, or simply curious about this extraordinary way of experiencing the world, this podcast is your guide to unraveling the neurodivergent experience. And you can listen to the latest episode on Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else via the link provided. What's people's thoughts on this? Has anybody listened to this podcast or any other episodes?
I would encourage any podcasting, and these people are well known, so it's always a privilege to put out things by autistic people, by people who have ADHD, by people who are neurodivergent, and encourage anything in their direction, because this is what we need. We need ourselves talking to ourselves.
Made me think of like mycelial networks and like rich cultures, and how so much of all that intersectional stuff you were talking about before with gender and sexuality, and then I suppose there's like socioeconomic status. There's so many different factors that are going to affect us as autistic people. So we're not a monolith, and I think we're only going to really understand autism when we can see. I think because actually seeing all of our differences might actually help us to see really more clearly what autism is. Because I'm thinking about how before women were readily identified, it's because they're studying to narrow a cohort of autistic people, and yeah, um, I feel like that diversity is going to help us to find more ways to thrive and to kind of create that broad stream rather than mainstream idea.
Yeah, I love your idea of broad stream rather than mainstream. Broad stream as an opposite to narrow stream. Mainstream being narrow stream. Might have more people following it, but it's a much more constricted space. And the broad stream, the outer edges of that, we can find our own little niches, our own little ways, our own Venn diagrams of creation of, and it always seems to me that the things that are aimed to help us are often the things that restrict us. And what we as a community of autistic people need to do is to create for ourselves the connections and then demonstrate how we did it, so that the people who are trying to spend money to serve the people who are not doing very well when they're autistic and when they're with their autism get the benefit of that. So some of us out here, outside the professions, have to build things like the Swan Group build things and infiltrate the norm that way. Show them a better way, create a structure, create a model, and then demonstrate it.
Yeah, I think it's Sherry Mead's idea. Sherry Mead is someone from the mental health recovery movement, coined the idea of the broad stream. I really like how it evokes little meandering streams for me as well. Like, and it's not. I get kind of nice images of a more slowly, calmly flowing river. So hopefully, I think that when I was at uni, I did a course in disability studies, and it was the most radical course in my entire degree. Really looking at how much of a challenge disabled people are to capitalist society, and how our ways of living really challenge the way that people are valued in mainstream society in terms of economic productivity.
Wow, we're back with Raymond's anarchy. We're back with this constant thing that keeps coming into our conversations, is how the capitalist system is actually working against autistic identity and autistic ways of being, perhaps, you know?
The next post is from Life in an Autism World, a writer, page run by an autistic person. And what they've shared is about autistic burnout. And what it says is, I think I just realised why autistic burnout is so bad. It's because when neurotypical people reach their limits, they can't go on. When autistic people reach their limits, They continue because they know they have to continue to be considered valuable. What's people's thoughts on that particular quote?
I don't think that there's much I fear more than burnout and the loss of skills and ability to look after myself. I'm scared of going back there. And I was struck in that post about like them sharing how you reckon neurotypical people like stop when it gets too much, and this idea of having to keep going beyond limits. Yeah, that's familiar.
Yeah, but first looking at it, you're thinking, what do they mean by that? Because it's kind of using words of the word valuable. But then again, when I think again, yeah, I get what it's saying is if I stop doing something, it's like, where's the value of stopping? Because I'm at my best when I feel that I'm being valuable and contributing to something. Like the work that I do is generally community work, so it's generally trying to help things, even small things, in the grand scheme of things, but it's still doing that and being progressive as much as possible and being positive as much as possible and helping things like inquiries or even something simple like delivering a dog poo bag, which we all use to pick up the dog. That sort of thing. So when I stop, it's like even when I'm burning out, it feels like a lot of time's going to be wasted by the recovery from the burnout. And it's like trying to justify to yourself that you need rest and you need to look after yourself. But it's just this, you're that used to, or I'm that used to doing something. And it's when I'm not doing something, I feel bad about it because I feel I'm not contributing in any way. I'm just stagnating and I become restless. And that's why burnout generally happens because it's very hard to stop, even in the mind.
Wow, Harry, this is a post that everybody is reacting to. I've got texts in all over places. Justin, autistic burnout. And then to be considered valuable, exactly at the same time that you picked up on the word exclamation mark. And he puts out the sentence, trying to justify our existence, I think he's trying to say. And then Ray is trying to squeeze ourselves into conformities frames, social conformities frames, our society's conformities frames, causes us, the autistic people, to ache and be accident prone, bumping our heads. So the metaphor is that we're trying and we're tripping over all of these trips and traps set out for us when we try to conform like that, and we're the ones that end up bashing ourselves, making mistakes, hitting ourselves and causing ourselves these metaphorical hurts socially when we do it. And he immediately goes to the word valuable, like Justin, and says maybe valuable is just functional. So when we're getting valued in this post, it's whether whether we matter to the rest of people simply for our function and not be valued. So valuable is something that you can put a monetary value on or measure. Valuable, something that you can measure, that you can put a value on. Whereas valued is different. We want to be valued and not only valued when we are valuable. Going back to Justin, he says, yeah, we tend to do that to ourselves, commenting on you, Raymond, and he puts out emojis with pound signs and a big sack of money. And Raymond points out that these are real hurts that we give ourselves. When we're out there and we're accident prone and we're bumping our heads trying to conform, we really do get hurt, however much we might cover that over. And he says his limbs ache. So maybe he's talking about his own real hurts right now.
Is that a word as well? Functional? Functioning? That rings very true. Just to function, not just to exist, but to function while you exist. Oh, should I kind of change that a bit and just say just to live? Just saying exist sounds a bit stale, sounds a bit negative. Living and functioning. That's something it does ring true. The next post is from Autistic Jazzy, which is a personal blog. And the description: hi, I am Jazzy. I have level 2 autism with severe ADHD and mental health. I am really happy most of the time, but not always. And what they've shared is a quote. Autism isn't a disease. It is a different way of living. A chance to see the world through a different perspective. Someone with autism can teach you love. Needs no words. I'm going to read that again. Autism isn't a disease. It is a different way of living. A chance to see the world through a different perspective. Someone with autism can teach you love needs no words. Heavy hitting quote, and something that I'd be really aspired to in the past. What's others' thoughts on this particular quote? Particularly the first words, autism is not a disease. In my experience, even after the diagnosis and feeling that autism was a hindrance, particularly because of the diagnosis I was given at the time, back in the late 90s, as Asperger's syndrome. That word syndrome. I have never looked upon autism as a disease, but more as a deficit. But basically, it kind of means sort of the same thing as I think the quote's trying to say, Autistic Jazzy's trying to say. And what it's saying is it's not a deficit, it's not a thing that's wrong, it's just a different way of being, which I have gradually come to accept, over years, and happily glad to accept. Because many times years ago, I was really frustrated that I was autistic, and I wish I wasn't, and I wish there was a way to not be autistic anymore. Almost thinking of a cure, because I can remember reading somewhere there is no cure for this. It's a lifelong condition. You need to live with it, sort of thing. It was all kind of very negative language, and even though it was telling you it was something wrong with you, and saying they don't know where it came from and all that, but it was still a deficit. It was still something wrong with you. So this kind of quote is kind of inspirational, try to turn it on its head and saying it's not that, it's a different way of being, and it's trying to get people to understand that. And it can be quite difficult for many people to understand that, because autism takes on many different forms in terms of the individual. And there's many people who are autistic that need a lot of support. And it sounds like this sort of quote is downplaying that. And people and their carers and parents may get very upset by that. In fact, they have been. And I've seen many quotes from people in those positions that try to counter this, not to poo-poo and put it down, but basically say, stop trying to simplify it, even though these sort of quotes, I don't think are trying to do that. It just shows you that life in itself, autism or not, is just not that black and white. But Raymond, you're saying we are living, it's just being obscured. Yep, obscured is something that I've heard many times before in relation to that, yep. Okay. Makes sense. It still makes sense, yep. Absolutely. Thank you, Raymond. The next post is from I've Been Autistic All Along, who's a blogger who is sharing their experience of being late diagnosed autism and ADHD with memes, cats, and sunsets sprinkled in. Qualified autism peer support worker as well, based in the UK. And they've shared a post from Monica Hess, which isn't autism specific, but it's still interesting all the same. And it says, I swear the universe can be divided into two kinds of people. Number one, I had to go through it, so you should too. And number two, I had to go through it, so I'll work to make sure you don't. What's your thoughts on this particular information?
My ears pricked up when you said the word a peer support worker, because I'm a bit into peer support. I might have mentioned it before a few times. And yeah, that I've gone through it and I don't want anyone else to go through it. I really relate to that. Like, I remember going through some really tough stuff and felt so alone. And the only blessing that came out of it was like I meet people now who I wish they'd never had to go through any of it, but I'm able to kind of relate to them and show up when for them at times where people who've not gone through the same sort of like trauma specifically, just you can't relate. Like people will often say, "Oh, I just can't imagine what you're going through," and yeah, I think that loneliness of having an alienating experience, and I'm sure even just I think of people. Sorry, I'm going on tangents when I'm talking, but I know that a lot of us will understand what it's like to go through an isolating experience. And I think from what I've read as well that they do reckon that people who go through really what you call traumatic experiences, but who don't have to, but who have support and aren't isolated, are less likely to develop like PTSD than if you're isolated going through a horrific experience.
This might be a wee bit like mentoring, isn't it? It makes me think of the other groups who had, pioneers before them who suffered and were able to be an example and to broaden out the experience so that the younger generation then didn't have it as difficult, if at all, than they had it. So I'm hopeful that for the younger generation there is now a lot of communication and connection to enable them to not bringing and experience. That doesn't mean they won't, but it makes it a wee bit easier.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the way I'm looking at the first one, it's like it's saying, I've been through this experience and it was horrible, but you should too, because it's like maybe a rites of passage or something, or it's how you develop into an adult, or how you need to experience this and you become a stronger person and all that kind of nonsense. And that's always kind of bothered me. It's like there's certain things in society they say you must do to. It's just certain things you must do, or certain things you must experience. That because it's the way things are, and if you come through it, it's better for you. It's a limited scope, but it's something in my head.
There used to be a wee joke that went around about John Lennon that said he was said in an interview that I've suffered for my art, now it's your turn, when he released a pretty trying LP. But this reminds me of a meme I saw going around recently, which picked up my ears, which was relating to exposure therapy and this idea that you should confront your issues. And the person said, like, okay, I know that if I stick a pin in my finger it will hurt. I've got to continue sticking pins in my fingers. But it was something like that. I might be misquoting. And I immediately realised that that wasn't a very good analogy, but the point is there, and it's why I'm kind of so resistant to this idea of exposure therapy.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the comments what this might relating to, or it's certainly a context that it may be in relation to, because it does make sense, and that's relating to abuse of some kind, like domestic abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, because there has been instances where someone has went through that and had a hard time and all that, and obviously, but they've done it themselves to others. And it's that sort of thing, possibly. And obviously, that's saying, well, don't do that to others, maybe. But yeah, it's context. It just shows there's so much out there that can be taken from like these words.
Nuance.
The next post is from Chris Benello, autistic author. And he's the author of the Underdog series, What Do You Love Most About Life? And Alfie the Speed Cuber. And what he shared is, when I was a child, I used to daydream myself to sleep. I used to lie in my bed at night and invent a story, usually featuring Sonic with me playing the role of Tails, obviously, or the Bash Street Kids or something. And I daydreamed the story to myself until I ran out of mental energy and fell asleep. I'm 39 now, and honestly, that habit never died. The only difference is that these days I wake up the next day and turn it into a chapter. What's people's thoughts on this?
I'm immediately thinking, was there no one to read him a story? What age was he at this point? When I was a child, I suppose it's past the reading them stories stage. So this person is grown up to be a storyteller. Yeah. Narratives. Yeah. I used to do this thing at night where, like, I would think of what was happening tomorrow that was really, really good, in order to, and I don't want to get too dark, make it through the night. So I just thought I'd put that one in there.
I can identify what Chris is saying, because as a child and as a young adult, I even aspired to be an author, a writer, and I did the same sort of thing myself. In different ways, it was just like making up stories and then falling asleep, sometimes even dreaming about what I was thinking about. Not always, but sometimes. And it was this kind of creative mind, and it was a great dream. And then when I woke up, I was raging, because most of the time it was sort of comfort. Because at the time, we were at school, even if without that, I was just not feeling fitting in and not feeling great. But in the stories, I'd be included. I'd even be the hero, sort of kind of thing. Or it even wouldn't be about me. It'd be forgetting about myself, but making up characters, nothing to do with real life. It's just like escaping into a fantasy sort of thing, which makes you forget your troubles. And it's amazing what the mind can do. And I used to write stories, and I used to draw comic books, and I used to write stories about getting revenge on the bullies and stuff like that. And even getting away from that, as I've said before, is just making up things altogether. And I just thought it was very therapeutic and very soothing. The only thing about it is you'd never wanted to come out of it, and reality became a little bit difficult. But it was still worthwhile doing. And even though I don't do it now, maybe it's something I could do, maybe something to write down. I mean, I'm a writer, or I have been, and it's mostly poetry now anyway, because it's a sort of kind of, it's the kind of platform I kind of do my writing. But there was a time that I liked to write stories and this sort of escapism sort of thing. So I can identify with a lot of what Chris is saying there.
It's like that thing we mentioned earlier about making your fantasy a reality. It's this idea we've been given that it's not a real job, that's not a real interest you've got there, it's just a fancy. But it's probably your joy. you know, and yeah, writing and telling stories. And again, I had something to say, but it's gone. A lot of it, when I was young, was like mimicry. It's like, and I see a lot of creativity is inspired by and comes from mimicking, copying. It's like we used to always use this amazingly hard toilet paper they used to have in primary school as tracing paper, and people used to say, "Oh, you're a great drawer." I went, "No, I just traced it and copied it." But eventually, you kind of learn things through copying, and the wee differences in it are peculiar to you, and you can take that further if you want. But it's all this stuff about being creative and imaginative. They really try and drum it out of you, don't they?
Yeah, they certainly try. But creativity, in the main, I hope, always remains in a lot of people. And that's what makes a lot of people, that's what a lot of autistic people kind of move on with their lives. Sometimes people become authors like Chris, or artists, songwriters, musicians, singers, you know, so many different things that were originally a hobby or even just a coping mechanism for tough times in childhood or even adulthood.
As you said, Harry, it's therapeutic too. It's probably the means of communication that we need or require, given that the ones we inherited or were taught often don't really work for us. And so we have to like rewrite the story and be inspired by these other modes of activity and activism and creation.
The last post tonight is from Reach Every Voice, which is a disability service and is a practice of educators working with non-speaking and minimally speaking autistic students. We teach these students to express themselves with alternative communication. We also collaborate with families and schools. And what they're talking about is Nick's tips, which is advice from a non-speaking autistic guy. And they're saying that throughout 2024, Nick's advocacy has grown, reaching thousands of people with his social media posts, blogs, reels, and presentations. We are so proud of the work he's doing and are even more thrilled it is resonating with so many people in ways that are affecting change in our society. All of Nick's tips have been popular posts, but this particular one has really connected with our followers this year. We're grateful to him for lending his insight to the list of suggestions for how folks can be respectful of non-speaking people. We hope you'll share with everyone. So this is 5 ways to be respectful of non-speaking people. Number 1, forget everything you think you know about autism unless you learnt it from an autistic person. Number 2, remember that autistic people can look like they aren't listening, but may actually hear everything you say, unless they tune you out because you're boring or insulting. Number 3, you don't need to talk louder or slower or as if I am a baby. Number 4, Right the wrongs you might have done. Say you're sorry to folks you've underestimated. And number 5, learn from as many autistic folks as humanly possible. So this is something that we've touched on many times before, about people that don't communicate through words in terms of verbal speaking, non-speaking, and how many people in those positions feel underestimated because they don't communicate that way, and basically educating people to think a little differently. What's others' thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a lovely, timely reminder. Really clear, really nicely played out, and so much of it covers all autistic people. So it's really nice for somebody who describes himself as non-speaking to include us as well. I don't know quite how to do it, but what I want to do more and more is involve autistic radio with the non-speaking community, or with the people who use alternative communication. There's not enough crossover, and it's something I really would like to build on.
Yeah, it's about being as inclusive as possible and as fair as possible. And see, saying that, it sounds so patronising, but it's not. It really is genuine, because it's a difficult thing to do, but it's not an impossible thing to do, which is the main thing, which is the important thing to remember. There may be difficulties in many ways of trying to make things more inclusive and fair, but it's certainly not impossible.
Well, for me, it's selfish. It's about my own benefit. I have read some of the writings of people who use alternative communication, and we've been exposed to the guy on the BBC programme, and it seems to me that there's knowledge and information and sharpness that we would otherwise miss out on. So yeah, it's not patronising because it's selfish. I want to know the stuff that other people know.
Well, that's us come to the end of the 555, the Harry's Facebook, the Facebook sharing and discussion. Been a very good discussion tonight. It's part of the day 1 of Radio Days, so I've really enjoyed it. So thanks everybody for taking part, and especially many thanks to the people that have shared the posts that were read out tonight, and I look forward to doing it again. So thanks once again, and I'll hand over to Jules to sum things up.
Well, there is no summing up. You've just done it, and I'm happy. Let's just leave it there. I'll cut this out of the broadcast, and thank you for doing that, Harry. Thank you for sealing up today's broadcast here on Autistic Radio.